The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma, Volume 1, The Path of Individual Liberation, Chapter 2. With any kind of spiritual practice, you need to have a basic understanding of where you are starting from, where you are going, and what you're working with. It is necessary to start with what you are and why you are searching. If you do not know that basic ground, there is no point, because your ideas become mere fantasy. Although you may hear about advanced ideas and experiences, your understanding will be based purely on your own expectations and desires. It is a weak aspect of human nature to always want to see and hear something colorful and extraordinary. But an emphasis on extraordinarily enlightening and delightful experiences only feeds your expectations and preconceptions. So your mind is preoccupied with what will be rather than what is. That approach is rather destructive. It is not fair to people to perpetuate their weaknesses, their expectations, and their dreams. It is better to begin with the realistic starting point of what they are. Before we speak of liberation and freedom, we need to discuss the basis of the path, which is confusion. It is important to begin by considering the development of what in Buddhist tradition is called ego. This may sound pejorative, but we do not need to be ashamed of what we are. Although our background may not be particularly enlightened, peaceful, or intelligent, it is good enough. We can work with it. It is like plowing a furrow and planting seeds. So we are not trying to get rid of ego, but simply acknowledge it and see it as it is. Open space. In the development of ego, at the beginning, there is basic ground, basic consciousness, open space. There is openness, freedom, and spaciousness all the time. For example, in everyday life, at the first moment we see an object, there is a sudden recognition, without logic or conceptualization. We just perceive openness. But immediately we panic, and we hurry to try to put something into that openness. We try to find a name or a pigeonhole so that we can locate and categorize that particular thing according to our own ideas and conceptualizations. As that process continues, the ego becomes more and more solid. However, the idea of ego as a solid, ongoing entity is illusory. It is a mistaken belief. Although a confused mind would like to view itself as solid, it is only a collection of tendencies and events. This collection is referred to as the 5 skandhas, or 5 heaps: form, feeling, perception impulse, concept formation, and consciousness. The 5 skandhas, the first skandha, form, solidifying space. In the beginning, there is open space belonging to no one, and within that space is primeval intelligence, or vidya. So there is both intelligence and space. It is like a completely open and spacious room in which you can dance about and not be afraid of knocking anything over. You are this space. You are one with it. But you become confused. Because it is so spacious, you begin to whirl and dance about. You become too active in that space. As you dance, you want to experience the space more and more, to enjoy the dance and the openness. But at that point, space is no longer space as such. It has become solid space because of your unnecessary urge to contact it. When you try to cling to space, to grasp it, the whole perspective is completely changed. You have solidified space and made it tangible. That sense of self-consciousness is the birth of duality. Spaciousness has become solid space, and you have begun to identify yourself with the I. You're identified with the duality of I and space, rather than being completely one with the space. You have become self-conscious, conscious that you are dancing in space. That is the birth of the first skandha, the skandha of form. Having solidified space, you forget what you've done. Suddenly there's a blackout, a gap. Your intelligence suddenly collapses and you are completely overwhelmed by ignorance in a kind of reverse enlightenment experience. When you wake up, you become fascinated with your own creation, acting as if you had nothing to do with it, as though you yourself were not the creator of all this solidity. You deliberately ignore the openness and intelligence. So the intelligent, sharp, precise, flowing, and luminous quality of space becomes static. There is still primeval intelligence, or vidya, but it has been captured and solidified. Therefore, it has become avidya, or ignorance. That blackout of intelligence is the source of the ego. From that sudden blackout, as you continue to explore, gradually things become more and more solid. 3 stages of ignorance. The skandha of form has 3 stages. The first stage, the birth of ignorance, is a kind of chemical reaction in which you come to the conclusion of your own separateness. It is as if there were a desert, simple and basic, but strangely and suddenly one of the grains of sand popped up and began to look around. The second stage is called ignorance born within. Having noticed that you are separate, you feel you have always been so. However, that instinct towards self-consciousness is awkward. You feel unbalanced, so you try to secure your ground and create a shelter for yourself. You take the attitude that you are a confused and separate individual, and that is all there is to it. The third type of ignorance is self-observing ignorance. As you are watching yourself, you see yourself as an external object, which leads to the notion of other. You are beginning to have a relationship with the so-called external world. You are beginning to create a world of forms. The second skandha, feeling. Having managed to transform space into solidness, you would then like to possess and grasp it. Having solidified the duality of self and other, you try to feel the qualities of that other in order to reassure yourself that you exist. You reach out to sense whether that other is seductive, threatening, or neutral. You think that if you can feel something out there, then you must really be here. The mechanism of feeling you set up is extremely efficient. The third skandha, perception impulse. In the act of perception, having received information about the outside world from the skandha of feeling, you respond to that information in 3 ways. By drawing in, pushing away, or being indifferent. The skandha of feeling transmits its information, and you make judgments. You react. Whether you react for or against or indifferently is automatically determined by this bureaucracy of feeling and perception. If you find the situation threatening, you push it away. If you find it seductive, you draw it to you. If you find it neutral, you are indifferent. So perception impulse is an automatic, impulsive reaction to intuitive feeling. The fourth skandha, concept formation. The automatic reaction of the third skandha is not enough of a defense to protect your ignorance and guarantee your security. In order to protect and deceive yourself properly, you need intellect, the ability to name and categorize things. With intellect, you can label things good, bad, beautiful, ugly, and so on. With each of the skandhas, the structure of ego is gradually becoming heavier and stronger. Up to this point, ego's development was purely based on action and reaction. But from this point on, the ego is becoming more sophisticated. You begin to experience intellectual speculation to confirm and interpret yourself. The nature of intellect is quite logical, and your obvious tendency is to use that logic to create a positive condition for yourself. You use the intellect to confirm your experience, to interpret weakness as strength, to fabricate security, and to verify your ignorance. So although primordial intelligence is happening all the time, it is being employed by ignorance, by dualistic fixation. The fifth skandha, consciousness. The last stage of the development of ego is consciousness. Consciousness is an amalgamation of the intuitive intelligence of the skandha of feeling, the energy of the skandha of perception impulse, and the intellectualization of the skandha of concept formation. That combination produces thoughts and emotions. So at the level of the fifth skandha, we find emotional upheavals and the uncontrollable and illogical patterns of discursive thought. With the development of discursive thoughts and fantasies, the whole thing is completely secured. The five skandhas present a complete picture of ego. According to Buddhist psychology, the ego is simply a collection of skandhas, or heaps. But actually there is no such thing as ego. It is a brilliant work of art, a product of the intellect which says, let's give all this a name, let's call it I. That I is the label that unifies that disorganized and scattered process into one entity. It is very clever.